Right now, as you watch this video, at least 3 separate U.S. military installations across the Middle East have come under confirmed attack within a 6-hour window. Over 40 projectiles have been tracked by regional radar systems, and Pentagon officials activated emergency force protection protocols at exactly 02:17 a.m. Eastern Time. Not Iraq, not Syria, not just Yemen, everywhere. That is the word being used behind closed doors, because what just happened is not a single strike. It is not a rogue militia. It is not a coincidence. It is a pattern, and patterns are how wars begin. At Al Asad Air Base, silence broke first, not with explosions, but with alarms, the kind that trained personnel do not ignore. At Erbil, radar operators saw objects moving too low, too fast, too coordinated. And in the Red Sea corridor, commercial shipping channels, the circulatory system of global trade, went quiet. Not a signal, not a ping, just absence. 3 locations, 3 different methods. One message. But here's the part almost nobody is saying out loud. This was not designed to destroy, it was designed to be seen, which raises a question that should make you uncomfortable. If this was only the signal, what does the real strike look like? Iran is not escalating this conflict because it wants war. It is escalating because it believes war has already been redefined, and the United States has not adjusted to that reality. That is the thesis. And if that sounds abstract, stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how a network of low-cost, precision strikes is being used to quietly rewrite the rules of deterrence, and more importantly, the 2 paths this situation now opens, one that stabilizes the region and one that locks it into a slow, irreversible spiral. We are going to break down the exact moment this began, the weapon systems involved, the real financial asymmetry behind these attacks, and the part that almost no outlet is covering, the strategic logic that makes this far more dangerous than it looks on the surface. And you need to be early on this, because the next 72 hours of this story are going to move fast, and the people who understand it first are the ones who are not reacting blindly when the next headline hits. So if you have not already, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, because you cannot afford to be 48 hours behind on this one. Now let us go back to where this actually started. Let us go back to April 18, 2026, 01:43 a.m. local time, Al Asad Air Base, Western Iraq. The desert air was still, no wind, no movement, the kind of silence that military personnel actually trust, because it usually means systems are working, threats are distant, and the night will pass like hundreds before it. Generators humming, routine patrols rotating, coffee half finished on metal desks, nothing unusual, not a single outgoing alert. Then the radar flickered, not a failure, not interference, a signature, low altitude, multiple vectors, converging. At first it did not make sense, because the speed profiles didn't match conventional cruise missiles. Too slow, too deliberate, almost patient. Engines off, weapons loaded, waiting. Within seconds, secondary systems confirmed. Incoming unmanned aerial systems and short-range ballistic projectiles likely launched from multiple dispersed locations. And here is where the timeline matters. According to Reuters, the first defensive response was initiated at 01:47 a.m., just 4 minutes after detection. The Pentagon's official briefing, released later that day, confirmed that over $1.2 billion worth of defensive infrastructure was activated in under 300 seconds. Meanwhile, CNN reported that similar alert conditions were triggered at Erbil Air Base at 01:52 a.m., suggesting synchronized targeting. And Al Jazeera, citing regional security officials, estimated that at least 28 separate aerial objects entered Iraqi airspace within a 10-minute window. Stop. Read that again. 28. This was not improvisation. This was choreography. And the deeper truth is this. The dry timber had been stacking for years. Sanctions tightening, proxy networks expanding, drone technology becoming cheaper, more precise, more accessible. This is not just a base. It is the forward nerve center of American military projection in the region, the circulatory system of power, logistics, and deterrence. And for the first time in a long time, it was touched. Revelation number 1. This was not a symbolic strike. It was a precision stress test of American military architecture across an entire theater. According to Reuters, at least 43 projectiles, combining loitering drones, short-range ballistic missiles, and guided rockets were launched across 3 operational zones within a 6-hour period. The Pentagon's Joint Staff Briefing, delivered at 11:30 a.m. on April 18, 2026, confirmed that over 85% of incoming threats were intercepted, but not all. And that not all is where the story actually begins. At Al-Assad, 2 hardened aircraft shelters sustained direct impact. At Erbil, a logistics staging area, housing fuel reserves and maintenance equipment, was damaged. And in the Red Sea corridor, Lloyd's List Intelligence reported temporary disruption affecting over $9.6 billion in daily maritime trade flow. Now let us talk about asymmetry. A single Iranian-style loitering munition, based on estimates from BBC defense analysts, costs between $20,000 and $50,000. The interceptor missiles used by U.S. systems, Patriot PAC-3 or equivalent, range from $3 million to $4 million per launch, according to Pentagon procurement data. Dollar for dollar at $50,000 is forcing a $3 million response. Read that again. That is not warfare, as most people understand it. That is economic erosion by design. Now layer in credibility. General Michael Kurilla, commander of U.S. Central Command, appointed in 2022 and widely regarded as one of Washington's most experienced regional strategists, acknowledged in a closed-door session reported by the New York Times that these attacks represent a persistent and evolving threat matrix. His words, not mine. Even CNN, citing defense officials, noted that force protection levels remain elevated across multiple installations, meaning this is not over. And here is the part that matters most. The system worked, but it worked at a cost that cannot be sustained indefinitely. That is revelation number 1, and we are just getting started. Revelation number 2, and this one nobody saw coming. At 06:12 a.m. local time, just hours after the initial wave, the sky over a residential block on the outskirts of Erbil turned from pale blue to a dull gray haze. The streets were quiet, shop shutters half open. A bakery on the corner had just pulled its first batch of bread from the oven, steam rising, the smell of flour and heat still in the air. Children were walking to school, not running, not hiding, just walking. Because until that moment, this was still somewhere else. A base, a military target, a distant problem. Then debris fell, not from a direct strike, but from an interception. According to BBC and Al Jazeera, fragments from defensive systems engaged overhead landed across civilian-adjacent zones, injuring multiple residents and damaging nearby homes. Reuters later confirmed at least 7 civilians wounded, including a 9-year-old girl. Her name is Sarah Ahmed. She was on her way to school. Let that land. Because this is where the narrative begins to fracture. Officials said the systems worked. They said the threats were neutralized. They said civilian areas were not targeted. He said neutralized. He did not say contained. He did not say without consequence. That was not an accident, because in modern conflict, the line between protection and collateral damage is no longer clean. It is blurred by physics, timing, and proximity, and here is what almost no one is willing to confront. Even a successful defense can still produce victims. According to CNN, U.S. officials acknowledged that fallout zones from intercepted threats remain an ongoing risk in dense environments. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported internal discussions about relocating certain defensive assets further from population centers, but those discussions came after the fact, after the debris, after the injuries, after Sarah. If you are still here, if you are trying to understand what this actually means beyond headlines, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. Because stories like this evolve in layers, and the next layer is already forming. And it leaves us with a question that does not have an easy answer. When defense itself creates danger, what exactly are we protecting? Revelation number 3, and this one is about what is happening to the institution itself. Because what you are looking at is not just a series of attacks, it is a system under strain, operationally, financially, and strategically. Here is the list. April 12th, 2026. U.S. force protection levels raised across CENTCOM installations. April 14th, 2026. Emergency resupply request for interceptor munitions submitted to Congress. April 16th, 2026. Pentagon acknowledges inventory pressure in classified briefing reported by CNN. April 17th, 2026. commercial shipping insurers increase Red Sea risk premiums by 18%, according to Lloyd's List, April 18, 2026, morning. Coordinated multi-base attacks executed April 18, 2026, afternoon. Internal review launched into Air Defense Allocation Strategy April 19, 2026. Reuters reports accelerated procurement discussions for lower-cost counter-drone systems. April 20, 2026. Congressional staff briefed on sustainability concerns tied to current defense posture, no commentary, because the length of that list is the argument. Now look at the timing. On April 17th, the day before the strikes, a senior defense official was publicly discussing regional stability indicators at a policy forum in Washington. Calm language, controlled tone. The next morning, bases under fire. That is not a punchline. That is a documented fact. This is the deeper layer. The system is reacting faster tactically than it is adapting strategically. And that gap is where pressure builds. Revelation 1 showed you the physical cost. Revelation 2 showed you the human cost. This is the institutional cost, the slow friction that accumulates when doctrine, budget, and battlefield reality begin to drift apart. Say that again. When doctrine lags reality, even success becomes unsustainable. Because intercepting 85% of threats sounds like victory until you realize it requires exponentially higher spending, constant readiness, and perfect coordination across multiple theaters. That is not how you win wars. That is how you get worn down by them. And the people inside this system, they are not incompetent. They are not disloyal. These were not broken actors. They were loyal to the system. And that is the thing that is now being tested. Now let us talk about the strategic logic Iran is applying, because this is not escalation in the traditional sense. It is deterrence re-engineering under fire. Iran is not trying to win a conventional war against the United States. It is trying to make the cost of U.S. presence in the region permanently unstable, politically expensive, and economically unsustainable. In simple terms, not defeat, but exhaustion. This is closer to the logic of World War II Atlantic U-boats than modern battlefield confrontation, not decisive battles. Instead, continuous pressure on supply lines, logistics, and psychological confidence. Each strike forces a response. Each response drains resources. Each cycle slightly weakens predictability. Compound collapse theory in motion. Each Iranian action increases operational cost for the U.S. Each U.S. response increases political pressure at home. Each political constraint reduces future operational flexibility, and that loop does not explode. It bends. Slowly, irreversibly. Now look at the global dimension. Israel has increased alert status across northern air defense grids. According to the Times of Israel, Saudi Arabia has quietly activated additional radar coverage over eastern infrastructure zones. Reported by Reuters, China, according to South China Morning Post, has issued only a neutral call for restraint, avoiding direct alignment. And then there is silence. The silence from certain European capitals is not confusion. It is calculation, because silence in geopolitical systems is rarely absence. It is positioning. Silence is evidence. Now add one more layer, maritime insurance markets. According to Lloyd's List intelligence, Red Sea risk premiums have already increased again following the attacks, affecting global shipping costs that eventually reach supermarkets in Berlin, factories in Shenzhen, and fuel pricing in New York. 3 continents, 1 pressure field. Now here is the engagement reality. If you are trying to understand global stability, like this video and share it with people who still think this is just regional conflict, because it is not. The actors who might stabilize this system have gone quiet, and the system that is driving escalation sits exactly where it was, undisturbed, watching. Now let us talk about what this means for you personally, because this is where the story stops being about governments, militaries, and strategy rooms, and starts becoming something that shows up in ordinary daily life. If you think this is distant, it is not. The first transmission is already visible in prices. According to shipping risk indices tracked by Lloyd's List, even a single disruption in Red Sea corridors can increase global freight costs by 10% to 18% within days. That does not stay in shipping reports. It moves into imported goods, fuel distribution, and food pricing. That means fuel costs rise first, transport costs follow, grocery prices adjust last, and by the time it reaches you, it looks normal, but it is not normal. It is downstream pressure. In the United States, energy analysts cited by Reuters have already flagged potential short-term oil volatility spikes of 3%, 6%, following renewed regional escalation signals. That may sound small, but in global energy markets, even a $5 increase per barrel translates into visible changes at the pump within weeks, and it does not stop there. The same logistics chains that carry military supplies also carry the components for electronics, AI server infrastructure, and data center cooling systems. Meaning even the digital economy, cloud services, AI tools, streaming platforms, is indirectly tied to these roots. The Silicon Valley data centers are not insulated from geopolitical instability. They are downstream from it, and that is the real shift most people miss. Modern conflict is no longer contained in battlefields. It propagates through systems that were never designed to absorb geopolitical shock. So when you see inflation numbers move, when you see shipping delays, when you see energy uncertainty, that is not separate from this story. It is the same story, just translated into your daily life. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The crisis did not create uncertainty. It just made it impossible to ignore. There is a genuine strategic constraint here that requires honest acknowledgement. Presenting only one side is the kind of analysis we criticize in other outlets, and this breakdown is not going to do that. Fair point. Several defense officials and analysts, including commentary cited by BBC security correspondents and Reuters defense briefings, argue that the U.S. retains overwhelming military superiority in the region, air dominance, naval presence, intelligence coverage, and missile defense integration. On paper, that is correct. The system is still vastly more capable in conventional terms. Fair point. We report it. But here is what military analysts like those referenced in the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, understand that surface-level comparisons miss. Modern conflict is no longer decided only by superiority. It is decided by sustainability under continuous pressure. Because having more interceptors does not matter if each interception costs exponentially more than the incoming threat, and having more bases does not matter if each base requires permanent, high-cost defense saturation. Recent Pentagon-linked procurement discussions reported by CNN also acknowledge increased demand for lower-cost counter-drone systems, an indirect admission that current cost structures are not optimal for prolonged engagements. So yes, militarily dominant systems exist, but dominance is not the same as endurance. The question is not whether the United States can respond. The question is whether it can maintain the same level of response indefinitely without structural strain. That is the real divergence between appearance and reality in this situation. So where does this leave us? Let me give you two clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. Contained stabilization. This is the scenario where escalation does not spiral into a wider regional war, but it is not automatic. It requires a very specific chain of events. Back-channel diplomacy, through intermediaries like Oman or Qatar, intensifies within days. Both sides agree, explicitly or implicitly, to limit attacks to non-lethal or symbolic targets. U.S. and regional allies accelerate deployment of lower-cost air defense systems to reduce economic strain. Iran pauses coordinated multi-site operations in exchange for indirect strategic concessions, sanctions relief signals, prisoner exchanges, or de-escalation guarantees. Maritime security in the Red Sea stabilizes enough to restore insurance premiums and shipping confidence. If all of that aligns, the system returns to a tense equilibrium, hostile but managed. This path is possible. But here is the condition that makes it difficult. Trust does not currently exist at the operational level between the actors involved. So even if leadership wants stability, field-level dynamics can still disrupt it. Path 2. Managed escalation spiral. This is not a collapse in the Hollywood sense. There are no explosions, no sudden declarations of total war. Instead, it is gradual. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, irreversibly, like water eroding stone. Each new strike expands target set slightly. Each retaliation expands defensive posture. Each defensive posture increases perceived threat. That is the spiral. A future historian will look back and ask, How did this become normal? And some analysts, particularly those in intelligence and defense forecasting circles cited by Reuters and IISS, have already warned that this gray zone exchange model risks becoming self-sustaining if no political off-ramp is activated early. Some saw it coming and were ignored. I think we are closer to path 2 than the headlines suggest, but I also thought that before the last escalation cycle in the region, and then one night changed the trajectory faster than any model predicted, and that is the point. Here is what I keep coming back to: the silence over Al-Assad Air Base at the beginning of this story, not the alarms, not the radar spikes, not even the interception data, the silence before it all began. Because in hindsight, that silence was never peace. It was temporary alignment of systems under strain that had not yet failed publicly. And now, after everything, after the intercepted projectiles, the fragmented air defense responses, the disrupted shipping corridors, that silence looks different. It looks fragile. This is the fire alarm logic of geopolitics. The system is not announcing itself through clarity, but through stress signals that only become obvious once you already know where to look. And Iran, whether one agrees with its strategy or not, is not operating like a traditional state actor here. It is operating like a pressure sensor inside a larger machine, triggering responses that reveal the machine's weak points in real time. The thesis is simple now. This is not a sudden conflict. It is a gradual exposure of structural limits inside modern deterrent systems that were designed for a different era. The system was never fully stable. It was temporarily cooperating. And now that cooperation is being tested at the edges, economically, militarily, psychologically, so the question is no longer whether escalation is happening. It is whether escalation is revealing something that was already there. Can a regional security architecture built on overwhelming force adapt quickly enough when the cost of force itself becomes unsustainable? Or is this the moment when strength stops being decisive and starts becoming expensive? Share this with someone who still thinks this is just another regional headline story. It is not. It is a live case study in how modern conflict reshapes economics, deterrence, and global stability at the same time. Because if you only see explosions, you miss the system. And if you only see politics, you miss the pressure underneath it. Now I want 3 questions left with you because understanding this depends on what angle you are standing on. Question 1, analytical. If interceptor systems cost millions per engagement, while incoming threats cost tens of thousands, how long can any defense architecture sustain that ratio before strategy becomes economics? Question 2, accountability. When civilian risk emerges even from successful interceptions, who carries responsibility? The attacker who initiated the strike, or the system that chose the defense method in a populated geography? Question 3, universal. Is global stability ever truly stable, or is it always just a temporary pause between pressures that have not yet collided? If this analysis helped you see the structure beneath the headlines, subscribe and turn on notifications, because these developments are not slowing down, and early understanding matters more than late reaction. Like the video if you want more deep geopolitical breakdowns like this. I read every comment, especially the ones that challenged the perspective presented here. This channel exists for stories that are not simplified, not diluted, and not reduced to headlines. Stories that require time to understand what is actually happening underneath the surface. Stay sharp.